Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha in our book series, Volume 6. This is titled The Natural Law of Kamma. What we do each week is we do 10 chapters where students in Zoom can volunteer to read a chapter. I'll share some teachings on that, and then I'll open up to whatever questions you guys have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can ask questions by putting that into the comment section, or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and ask any questions or volunteer to read that way. Oftentimes, students have read these chapters before class, or maybe they're planning to read them after class, because in addition to the words of the Buddha, you have a reference that takes you back to the original source teachings of the Pali Canon, and you also have words from me that are helping you understand how to integrate this into your day-to-day life. So this program is best when you've actually been reading, because you'll learn a lot more than just what we're studying in class. But nonetheless, this is an opportunity to come to class and get any kind of questions answered that you might have, where all of our other programs are kind of like a bachelor's or master's degree in Buddhist studies. This is more like a PhD program where you're maybe coming to class to seek the guidance of a teacher, like an advisor, rather than where I teach before in all the other programs. It's more of a traditional style of learning. So what I'll do is I'll send this over to you guys to see if there's anyone who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter. Looks like Pat is going to volunteer. Go ahead, sir.
All that occurs without a cause or condition. Then, monks, I approach those ascetics and Brahmins who hold such doctrine in view as this. Whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, neither pain nor pleasure, all that occurs without a cause or condition. And I said to them, is it true that you venerable ones hold such a doctrine in view? When I ask them this, they affirm it. Then I say to them, in such a case, is it without a cause or condition that you might destroy life, take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehood, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, have a mind of ill will, and hold wrong view? Those who fall back on absence of cause and condition as the essential truth have no interest to do what should be done and to avoid doing what should not be done, nor do they make an effort in this respect. Since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded, they do not guard the mind, and even the personal designation ascetic could not be legitimately applied to them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So here, this is Volume 6, Chapter 21, where it's the last discourse of a whole series of discourses, where the Buddha essentially approached these three different groups of ascetics and Brahmins, where the previous discourses that we studied last week, it was a group that was thinking that everything you experience now in terms of pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure is all caused from the past, that things that you've done in your past life. And there's people that actually think that today, that it's what they did in their past life that is causing what they experience today, and there's no way for them to change anything that they're experiencing today. And essentially what the Buddha says is you're not even really on the path to enlightenment, that you're not doing what should be done and avoiding what should not be done because you think everything that you're experiencing is based in the past and there's no way to change that. And the second one is based on God's creative activity, that he approached a group of people that thought that everything they were experiencing is based on God. And again, they affirm that that is what they think. So, and again, because they think God is the one who's causing their pleasure, pain, and neither pain nor pleasure, then there's nothing that they can do to fix it. So they basically don't do anything to improve what it is that they experience on a day-to-day basis. And now here's the third scenario, where somebody thinks there is no cause and condition. And he approached this group of people, and it was the same situation, that they agreed that essentially this pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure just arises randomly. There's no cause or condition that's actually producing it. So therefore, because of that, he says, hey, that is it because of, there is no cause or condition that you might destroy life, take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehood, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, which is craving, desire, attachment, that the mind's full of ill will, that this is the anger, hatred, and ill will, or hold wrong view, which is the lack of wisdom, the ignorance or unknowing of true reality. So we know through studying the teachings of the Buddha that each one of these things do have a cause and condition. It's craving, anger, and ignorance. Like that's the whole reason why someone would steal or take what is not given, because there's a certain craving there that the mind's like, I want that thing. And they don't want to work for it, but they have this longing, yearning for it. So they might steal it. And then they have a certain amount of ill will towards that being who they stole from. And then there's that ignorance or unknowing of true reality that they don't understand that this harm is going to come back to them. Or the same thing with like speaking of falsehood. This is like lying. When we lie, there's a certain craving there in the mind. The mind wants something. And then because the mind wants something and it's having a craving, it thinks if it tells the truth that it's not going to get what it wants. So it lies instead. So we know there's a cause and condition for each one of these things, like speaking harshly. The whole reason why an individual would speak harsh is because of craving, anger, and ignorance. There's a longing, yearning, and the mind can only be happy if people do it my way. And when the person's cravings are getting fulfilled, they'll be happy. But when their cravings are not getting fulfilled, that anger and frustration will arise. And then through your intention, speech, and actions, an individual will become harsh and bitter and hostile, almost trying to fear this person into doing things your way. And where that's coming from is the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, that lack of wisdom, not understanding that you're damaging your relationships and you're experiencing unwholesome results due to your craving and anger and ignorance. So each one of these things, they do have a cause and condition. You know, we could go through each one of them. It's always craving, anger, and ignorance. You can look at each one of these things and see how it's being caused by that. And if you haven't done that work yet, it would be wise for you to be able to go through so you can independently verify that there is a cause and condition. Because the Buddha is approaching these people who think that there isn't any cause or condition for these types of things. And because of that, they have no interest to do what should be done or avoid doing what should not be done. And they don't make an effort to actually improve. That's what the Buddha is saying, is you're not making this effort to improve your practice, becoming a better and better human being because you think these unwise things that are occurring, you just think that it's just happening randomly, that there's no cause and condition. But if you understand that there's a cause and condition here, you'll actively work to improve it. But because these people don't understand that, they're not working to actively improve it. And because of that, their mind is muddled, meaning they have a lack of concentration. Because when you have a lack of understanding and you have those pollutions that are in the mind, those 10 fetters, your mind will lack concentration. It'll be muddled. And an individual who doesn't understand that there is a cause and condition that is producing these things, they're not going to guard their mind. Because if you understand that it's your own mind that's causing these feelings and it's causing these particular things to occur, then you'll guard your mind with mindfulness so that when you see those things come up, you will then apply effort to eliminate it out of the mind. So these individuals who don't understand the cause and condition of what's producing these things, they don't guard their mind because they just think these things are happening randomly. And then ultimately the Buddha says this personal designation of aesthetic couldn't even legitimately be applied to these people, because to be an ascetic during his lifetime is to be on the path to enlightenment. So if you're not understanding that there is a cause and condition of why these things are occurring, then you're not even on the path to enlightenment. So that's why he's saying that this designation of aesthetic couldn't even legitimately be applied, because you need to be able to penetrate into this natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect. You need to be able to see this cause and effect. That's what you're awakening to. When we talk about getting to enlightenment, to awaken or to be awake, it is to cultivate wisdom about this natural law. And if you think there is no cause and condition, that means you're not even looking at the natural law of Kamma. You're not looking at the sequence of events that is occurring and making choices for that to no longer occur. So you're not even on the path to enlightenment, is what he's essentially saying here. So let me know what questions you guys have here. We studied some very similar chapters to this last week. You can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter. Is there someone who would like to read chapter 22? Okay, Vibhav. 2 times in one day.
Yeah. Thank you, teacher. Worst kind of doctrine that there is no karma. Monks, a hair blanket is declared to be the worst kind of woven garment. A hair blanket is cold in cold weather, hot in hot weather, ugly, foul-smelling, and uncomfortable. So too, the doctrine of Makali is declared the worst among the doctrines of the various ascetics. The unwise man Makali teaches the doctrine in view. There is no karma, no deed, no energy. That is, not only is there no result from karma, but also no karma itself. All deeds are null. Monks, the fortunate ones, arahants, the perfectly enlightened ones of the past, taught a doctrine of karma, a doctrine of deeds, a doctrine of energy. Yet, the unwise man Makali contradicts them with this claim. There is no karma, no deed, no energy. The fortunate ones, arahants, the perfectly enlightened ones of the future, will also teach a doctrine of karma, a doctrine of deeds, a doctrine of energy. Yet the unwise man Makali contradicts them with this claim. There is no karma, no deed, no energy. At present, I am the arahant, perfectly enlightened one, and I teach a doctrine of karma, a doctrine of deeds, a doctrine of energy. Yet the unwise man Makali contradicts me with this claim. There is no karma, no deed, no energy. Just as a trap set at the mouth of a river could bring about harm, pain, calamity, and disaster to many fish, so too the unwise man Makali is, as it were, a trap for people who has arisen in the world for the harm, pain, calamity, and disaster of many beings. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vibhav. So here the Buddha is commenting about this other teacher who is sharing that there's no Kamma at all, that this doesn't even exist. So again, we might think that during the lifetime of a Buddha, he's the only one teaching. Because if there was a Buddha that lived during your lifetime, I'm sure you would be interested in studying with that particular individual. But the thing is that a Buddha is not going to go out on the street and declare that they're actually a Buddha and say, okay, everybody come and study with me. So there's going to be other people who are actually teaching at the time of the life of a Buddha. And these other people are going to be teaching things that the Buddha is going to know is very unwise. And it's completely opposite of what it would take to be able to train your mind to get to enlightenment and experience this peace and joy. So the Buddha is talking about this particular individual who's teaching that there's no such thing as Kamma, that it doesn't exist. Because that's how the whole world functions, is through this natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, this sequence of events. But if there was somebody out there teaching that there is no Kamma, what the Buddha is saying is that this is a trap, that this is going to cause harm, pain, calamity, and disaster to many beings. Because if you didn't think that there was the such thing as the natural law of Kamma, you'd be out in the world just making all kinds of unwise decisions. And now as you're making all those unwise decisions, all this harm and calamity, this pain is going to be coming back to you. And you're not going to understand why. And you're just going to keep doing these things over and over and over again. So the Buddha is talking about this as a trap, because it's important that you don't believe in these kinds of things, but instead you penetrate into this to be able to see the truth of this cause and effect, to be able to see how this natural law actually functions. And then he also talks about how all the Buddhas are going to actually teach this same natural law, that there isn't going to be a fully perfectly enlightened one, a Buddha, who wouldn't teach the natural law of Kamma, because that is the truth. Any Buddha that awakens to enlightenment, they're going to know the truth, and they're going to be able to see this natural law very clearly, and then they're going to describe it for their students to be able to help their students to be able to see that same natural law as well. So let me know what questions you guys have here. The Buddha talking about how this is the worst collection of teachings, that there is no such thing as Kamma, because that's not true, and it would lead you astray, and you would end up experiencing all kinds of calamity because of it. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to chapter 23. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, we're going back to Pat again. All right, go ahead, sir.
The result of Kamma is threefold. And what is the result of Kamma? The result of Kamma, I say, is threefold, to be experienced in this very life, or in the next rebirth, or on some subsequent occasion. This is called the result of Kamma. This, monks, is called action's fruit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So you've seen this before when we've studied the very first chapter from this book, is where the Buddha is essentially saying you can't run and hide from your karma. Whatever decisions you make, either wisely or unwisely, you're going to experience the results of that, either in this life, the next life, or some subsequent occasion. Now, if you get to enlightenment in this life, you would have extinguished all your unwholesome karma. There isn't going to be a next life, so there isn't any karma to be experienced. But if you haven't extinguished all your unwholesome karma, that means there's still unwholesome karma that you have to deal with. And that's why an individual is coming back to be reborn again, to be able to experience that over and over and over again. So the Buddha calls this essentially the results of your own actions. It's called the actions fruit, is what he's calling it here. Is that because of the actions, either bodily actions, verbal actions, or mental actions, you're now going to experience certain results. And this is what you're cultivating the wisdom of, to be able to awaken to this natural law. And now, once you are able to independently verify the cycle of rebirth, you'll know that this is true, and you'll be able to see how, yes, beings are experiencing their karma in this life, the next life, or on some subsequent occasion. And if you're interested and curious how this works, let me know, because it's not anything mystical or magical, and I'll explain to you how you experience your karma from one life to the next. So if you guys have questions on this, let me know. Okay, no questions on this one? Yeah, so I explained this recently. Vibhav was asking this question, and other people were asking questions. This is a common one where people are curious, how do you experience your karma from one life to the other? Because it's not mystical or magical. But if you guys need that help, just let me know and I'll explain it to you. So now we'll go to chapter 24. Would someone like to read this one? Okay, looks like Zoe. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thanks, Teacher David. Beings bound by action? I might have missed the top part there. Oh, no, beings bound by action. One is not a Brahmin by birth, nor by birth a non-Brahmin. By action is one a Brahmin, by action is one a non-Brahmin. For men are farmers by their axe, and by their axe are craftsmen too. And men are merchants by their axe, and by their axe are servants too. And men are robbers by their axe, and by their axe are soldiers too. And men are chaplains by their axe, and by their axe are rulers too. So that is how the truly wise see action as it really is. See dependent origination, skilled in action and its results. Action makes the world go round. Action makes this generation turn. Living beings are bound by action, like the chariot wheel by the linchpin.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, they thought that based on where you were born, that's what determined what you were. That if you were born into a certain family, you are now a Brahmin. A Brahmin is a Hindu priest who is considered to be holy. And if you were born into this family, which was basically 15% of society, then they considered you to be holy. And now you would do rites, rituals, ceremonies, worship, and prayer for other people at a fee. So what the Buddha was teaching here and helping people to be able to see is, you're not a Brahmin, you're not a holy person based on your birth. You are considered to be wholesome or unwholesome based on your actions. Has nothing to do with where you're born. And this was, kind of like really beyond what people could even imagine during that time frame. They couldn't think beyond what they were currently thinking, that they thought it was based on where you were born that determines what you were. And it was mainly around these Brahmin. But then the Buddha goes further and he helps people to see that it's the same thing for all of these other things too. That you're a farmer based on your actions, or you're a craftsman, or a merchant, or a servant, or a robber, or a soldier, a chaplain, or a ruler. It's all based on your actions. It's your actions that determine anything that you experience in life. So that's where the Buddha comes down here and he says that's how the truly wise see it, that it's your actions as it really is. And you can understand dependent origination from volume 5, that It helps you to see how beings come into the world through this cause and effect relationship. And as you become more and more skilled in this action and being able to see a certain action, a certain decision, whether it's bodily, verbal, or mental, you can start to see how it's going to produce a certain results, right? And what the Buddha is saying here is that it's your actions that kind of bind you to any particular result that you're going to experience, much like a chariot wheel by the linchpin. A linchpin is like the focal point. So if you have like the horse and then you have the chariot itself, there's something connecting them in the middle. That's the linchpin, right? That's what's holding it all together. So it's our actions that really hold all of this together. What we choose to do based on our actions, that's what determines what we experience on a day-to-day basis. And the more you see this, it's very empowering. Sometimes when I talk about this, in classes that are very beginning classes, people think like, oh, the natural law of Kamma, you're blaming other people for the things that they experience. It's important that you don't ever see it that way. The natural law of Kamma isn't about blame or fault. It's not about punishments and rewards. It's not about who's at fault. It's about seeing this sequence of events and just being able to see true reality, that whatever we experience is coming from our own decisions. Because if we lack that wisdom, then we're going to keep making the same unwise decisions over and over and over again, and we're going to keep experiencing the same unwholesome results. But when you come to understand that it is your decisions, not as blame or fault, but it's your decisions that are leading to any result that you're experiencing, this is very empowering. Because if there's something you don't particularly care for that's going on in your life and you would rather that not occur, all you need to do is cultivate wisdom, make different decisions, and you'll experience different results. And that's the beauty of this natural law, is that it's always teaching you. It's like the most unbiased teacher you will ever find, because it's going to show you when you're making wise decisions, because you're going to experience wholesome results. And it's going to show you when you're making unwise decisions, because you're going to experience unwholesome results. So you should look at the things that you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis to determine whether this is something that's wholesome or unwholesome. And this is one of the reasons why you'd like to slow down the amount of decisions that you make in a given day. That oftentimes in the unenlightened state with craving, anger, and ignorance, the mind's going to be go, 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 making all these rapid decisions. And it's oftentimes very challenging to be able to read the Kamma that's coming back to you, because you're getting all these results coming back to you and you can't really trace it down to any particular decisions because you're making so many rapid, quick decisions. You'll see one of the teachings of the Buddha. He talks about people who are enlightened, that they don't make lots of rapid decisions, that they make very few goals for a particular day, that they have very few items that they're actually working towards. Where oftentimes in the unenlightened state, we'll have this really long to-do list and someone's just plowing through that in order to get through their day. But you can shorten that up and make really wise decisions in each one of these situations, and you'll actually be more productive. Because when you're just rapid fire going through a bunch of decisions, you're going to make a whole bunch of mistakes, and you think that maybe you're being more productive because you're making all these decisions, but you got to go back and clean all that stuff up, and you got to deal with all your unwholesome Kamma coming back to you. But if you can shrink that list down and be very focused and intentional with your decision making, then each decision you can ensure that it's wise and that it's a wise decision. And that way you don't have to clean anything up. It's just forward progress and forward progress and forward progress and forward progress and forward progress, because there's nothing to clean up. That's why enlightened beings are actually very productive. They actually are very successful in life. Whether they're a business person or whatever it is that they choose to do, they'll be very successful because they're not having to go back and clean up any messes. They're just making wise decision after wise decision after wise decision, and it's producing lots of wholesome Kamma for them. So it's your actions that is the linchpin. And that's why you'd like to really shrink down, that you're not making a ton of decisions in one day. That way you can see this unbiased teacher, this natural law of Kamma that's showing you at each step, what are the wholesome things that you're experiencing based on your wise decisions, and what are the unwholesome things you're experiencing based on your unwise decisions. And sometimes this Kamma doesn't come back to you immediately or within a couple of days or a couple of weeks. It's sometimes way down the road. So you're going to need to get very good at reflecting and being introspective, that when something happens, you can look at that thing objectively, and you can look inward, be reflective, and figure out what are the decisions you made that produced this. Because the ego is going to be in there telling you, no, it's not me, it's everybody else. And that's where a teacher comes in, that you can come and talk with the teacher and you can let them know what you're experiencing and what's coming back to you. And they can help you to look at this objectively to be able to see what are the decisions you made that led to this. You need to get really good at that, because then you can just change your decisions and you'll experience better results. So let me know what questions you guys have here, where the Buddha is helping his students to see that it's your actions that determine what you experience and who you are as a person. It's not where you're born. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. This is chapter 25. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, it looks like we got Leo. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. To be reborn, graceful, rich, and influential. Pali Canon. Some women are not prone to anger or often intensely frustrated. Even if she is criticized a lot, she does not lose her temper and become irritated, hostile, and stubborn. She does not display anger, hatred, and bitterness. And she gives things to ascetics and Brahmins, food and drinks, clothing and vehicles, garlands, scans, and ointments, bedding, dwellings, and lightning. When she passes away from the state, if she comes back to this world, wherever she is reborn, she is beautiful, attractive, and grateful, possessing supreme beauty and of complexion, rich with great wealth and property, and influential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leo. So in order to experience an improved rebirth, an individual needs to reduce their craving, anger, and ignorance, their pollutions of mind. Ideally, what you would do is you would completely eliminate them and get to enlightenment in this life, and then there is no rebirth. But when the Buddha is talking about rebirth here, the whole reason why this individual is experiencing improved rebirth is because they've reduced their craving, anger, and ignorance to a certain degree. Because if somebody's not prone to anger or often intensely frustrated, that means they've reduced their craving, anger, and ignorance to a certain degree. Even when this person is criticized, they don't lose their temper, they don't become irritated, hostile, and they're not stubborn. So that means that their mind has reduced their pollutions to a certain degree, that they're not displaying any kind of anger, hatred, and bitterness. And their reason why is here, that they're practicing this generosity, that this generosity is going to help to eliminate the craving in the mind, that when you're giving and sharing is training your mind to let go. Because with craving in the mind, you'll tend to hold on to things and be somewhat selfish. But when you live open-handedly and you're joyful in giving and sharing with others, then that means that your mind's helping your mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. And you're also coming in contact with people who you can learn from about how to train your mind. So if this person, it sounds like, hasn't gotten to enlightenment, which is what the Buddha is essentially describing, well, when they're reborn, they're going to be reborn into this better state, that they'll be beautiful, attractive, graceful, possessing this supreme beauty of complexion, rich in great wealth and property, and influential. Now, it's not that people who have these qualities are better than others, right? We should always view everybody as equal. But by having these qualities, it kind of sets you up to make it easier for you that in that next life, you'll be able to get to enlightenment more easily, if that's what you choose to do, is learn and practice. Because every single being has certain obstacles to overcome in order to be able to get to enlightenment. And if you're just looking for your next meal and trying to, acquire the basic resources to sustain your life, you'll spend so much time with that you don't have time to learn the teachings and train your mind and do all the other things you need in order to be able to get to enlightenment. But if you're born in a way that you already have great wealth and property, then that means you've already overcome that particular obstacle. Now, what that person chooses to do at that point is a choice for them to make. They could walk in towards the darkness, or they could decide to walk towards the light and decide to improve and grow and develop, becoming a better and better person. but being born with money and property, it puts you in a better position to potentially get to enlightenment in your future life. But obviously that's not the goal. The goal is to get to enlightenment in this life. But the same things that lead to enlightenment in this life, should you fall short of that, it's going to lead to an improved rebirth in your next life. And that's what the Buddha's talking about here. So by practicing generosity, it helps to reduce craving, which is going to help to reduce anger. And there's already a reduction of ignorance. And that's why the person's choosing to practice. And now they could either potentially get to enlightenment in this life. And if they don't, there's an improved rebirth for them in their next life, where they could potentially get to enlightenment in that life. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions. You guys are moving right through this. So here's chapter 26. Would someone like to read this? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
Gifts of a wholesome person. Monks, there are these 5 gifts of a wholesome person. What 5? 1, he gives gifts out of confidence. 2, he gives a gift respectfully. 3, he gives a timely gift. 4, he gives a gift unreservedly. 5, he gives a gift without injuring himself or others. 1, because he has given a gift out of confidence, wherever the result of that gift is produced, he becomes rich, with great wealth and property, and he is handsome, attractive, graceful, possessing supreme beauty of complexion. 2, because he has given a gift respectfully, wherever the result of that gift is produced, he becomes rich, with great wealth and property, and his sons and wives, slaves, servants, and workers obedient lend an ear and apply the mind to understand. 3, because he has given a timely gift, wherever the result of that gift is produced, he becomes rich with great wealth and property, and timely benefits come to him in abundance. 4, because he has given a gift unreservedly, wherever the result of that gift is produced, he becomes rich with great wealth and property, and his mind inclines to the enjoyment of the 5 kinds of fine sensual pleasures. 5, because he has given a gift without injuring himself or others, wherever the result of the gift is produced, he becomes rich with great wealth and property, and no damage becomes to his property from any source, whether from fire, floods, kings, thieves, or displeasing heirs. These are the 5 gifts of a wholesome person. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vibhav. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see this natural law of Kamma as it relates to generosity. Because what you come to understand is anytime you make any decisions in craving, anger, and ignorance, even the slightest little bit, it's going to produce unwholesome Kamma or unwholesome results for you. So what you're doing on this path is you're applying all the tools and the techniques from the Eightfold Path and all the other connected teachings to gradually bring down the craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind. And then you're gradually increasing the opposites of these. The craving, anger, and ignorance is called the unwholesome roots because they produce unwholesome Kamma. But then there's opposites that produce the wholesome results or the wholesome Kamma. The wholesome roots are generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. These are the exact opposites of craving, anger, and ignorance, because craving is to long and yearn, to chase after the objects of your affection. And because of that, the mind's holding on to things and clinging very tightly. Well, the opposite of that is practicing generosity. The anger, the hatred, the bitterness, and the hostility. The opposite of that is loving kindness and having a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. That's what's going to remedy your anger. And then the lack of wisdom or the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. The opposite of that is wisdom. So that's why you're not believing anything on the path. You're learning, you're reflecting to verify, and then you're practicing to be able to see the truth for yourself. So what the Buddha is going into here in this particular discourse is how this generosity is producing these wholesome Kamma for you, because it's a wholesome root. And that when you're giving gifts out of confidence, you're giving gifts respectfully, you're giving a timely gift, or you're giving unreservedly, or without injuring yourself or others, then it's going to produce certain results. Whenever you're practicing generosity, just like everything else, you need to practice it from the middle way, because if you practice it extensively, then you're not going to have the resources you need to be able to support yourself. But if you were never giving and you're never sharing, your mind's going to be quite selfish there. So you need to practice from the middle way. And now what the Buddha is doing is he's explaining to you how each one of these types of gifts are producing certain results. And this helps you not because you should give gifts and expect these kinds of things, because if there's an expectation behind any of your generosity, it's not pure generosity and it's not going to produce the results that you're looking for. But the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that by giving in this way, the results that you're experiencing is because of these gifts. And that helps you to be able to now see for yourself how this natural law of Kamma is functioning. But you should never be practicing generosity with an expectation of these things. Now, he's largely talking about things that are going to happen in a future life, but these things actually also occur within a current life too. So, for example, if you see somebody and you're like, oh my gosh, they're so beautiful, they're so rich, they're so handsome and attractive, why them and not me, right? That's your craving, or your longing, yearning to be that person, right? Instead, you can just understand that in a previous life that they gave certain gifts out of confidence. This is what produces the appearance of what people look like today in this existence, because it's from their previous life. Because your appearance isn't a result of everything you're doing in this life. There's some impact from your previous life too, but it does have a result of things that you're doing in this life. It's a combination of things that from a previous life, but this life as well. So this not only helps you to be able to understand this natural law of Kamma and what's going to be experienced potentially as people give gifts in this way, but it can help you see that certain people that are experiencing certain things in this life, that's the reason why, because of the way that they're giving gifts. So for example, this one, because a person is given a gift respectfully, because of that, they're experiencing these results, that they're having great wealth and property, that their sons, wives, and employees, here the Buddha is talking about slaves and servants, but we can think about that as employees. They're obedient, meaning that they're listening to this person. They're attentive to this person. They apply their minds to understand this person, right? So you'll see that this is the result of giving gifts. And what you would like to be able to do is practice in this way and making sure that you understand what it means to give a gift out of confidence, or give a gift respectfully, or give a timely gift, or give unreservedly, making sure you're still practicing the middle way, and then also giving a gift without injuring yourself or others. You need to understand what each one of these things are. And what I usually do is I explain that here. I didn't go into the details here, but there's other places where I've talked about each one of these things and what these things are so that you can practice them as you're practicing generosity. So let me know if you have questions on any of these things here. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Vibha, have your hands up. Is that from reading, or do you have a question?
Yeah, I actually have a question. I think we talked about this a little bit in a private chat. So, I guess the question is, how does generosity end up giving? If you're being generous in this life, how does it help you be rich in a future life? Or like when we talked about how karma is basically a result of your, or like the birth in the next life would be just how like being generous actually reduces your craving, anger, and
Yeah.
And your mind at the end of your life is basically how much craving, anger, and ignorance you've reduced in your mind. So when you're born in the next life, you have less craving, anger, and ignorance.
Okay.
So they that end up like you being rich or having great wealth and property, because that's not tied to any kind of, just because you've given a gift here, right? That's something we discussed, that if you give a gift here, it doesn't mean that you will get, a gift back or some money back some later point of life or another life.
Okay. So let me talk about the opposite of this, and then we'll come back and talk about this. Okay. So let's just say somebody hasn't worked on their mind in a particular life. They have extensive amounts of craving, anger, and ignorance. That means that because of their craving, they're going to be quite selfish. And now let's just say they happen to be reborn into the human realm. And now in that next life, they have a certain amount of selfishness because of their craving, and they're not very generous. So that means people aren't going to be generous with them, because they're not putting out generosity. So generosity is not going to come to them. So they're going to find it very difficult to acquire resources, because in order to become rich and wealthy, you're not doing that by yourself. You're doing that with other people choosing to enrich you. Nobody has become a, rich person by themselves. You're going to need other people to give you money in order to be able to now become rich. So if you have a certain amount of craving where you're being selfish and you're holding on to things and you're not willing to share with others, then other people aren't going to share with you. They're not going to give you resources. But conversely, if you can see that, conversely, on the other side, if you've done work in a certain life and you've reduced your craving significantly, and now you're going to be reborn into a family that is also quite generous and wealthy. And now, as you're practicing generosity in that future life, now as you're practicing generosity and you're sharing with people, people are going to be willing to share with you. And this is how you're now going to experience the wealth, because people are going to be willing to hire you for their business or get contracts with you or patronize your business and things of this nature, because you're practicing generosity. And now this is going to help you to become rich and wealthy. And you shouldn't ever practice this generosity in order for that expectation, because if you are, then there's no pure generosity there. It's not going to produce that result. But if you just practice without any expectation, now because of that generosity that you're putting out, more and more people are going to be interested in sharing with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I don't see any questions anywhere else. So let's move to the next one. This is chapter 27. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, we've got Yihang and Leo.
Thank you, Teacher David. These with fruit that result in great accomplishment and power. Having cultivated for 7 years a mind of loving kindness, for 7 eons of contraction and expansion, I did not return to this world. Whenever the eon contracted, I reached the plane of streaming radiance, and when the eon expanded, I arose in an empty heavenly mansion. And there I was, Brahma God, the great Brahma, the unvanquished victor, the all-knowing, the all-powerful. 36 times I was Saka, a ruler of the heavenly beings, and many hundreds of times I was a wheel-turning monarch, righteous, a king of righteousness, conqueror of the 4 regions of the earth, maintaining stability in the land, in possession of the 7 treasures. What need is there to speak of mere local kingship? It occurred to me, monks, to wonder of what kind of deed of mine is this the fruit? Of what deeds of ripening am I now of such great accomplishment and power? And then it occurred to me, it is the fruit of 3 kinds of deeds of mine, the ripening of 3 kinds of deeds, that I am now of such great accomplishment and power, deeds of giving, of mastery of the mind, and of refraining. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Yihang. So remember, the Buddha, prior to being a Buddha, he was a prince destined to become a king, but he stepped away from that. So here he is recounting kind of what he had been doing in this life, in his previous lives, that led him to where he is now. He's saying, okay, for all this time, I've cultivated the mind of loving kindness all throughout this, expansion and contraction of the world, that he did this work on his mind throughout multiple lives. He had been doing this work on his mind. And he talks about being able to observe the world as this being of God, the all-knowing and all-powerful. And he talks about all these different times that he was these other beings, this ruler of the heavenly beings, this wheel-turning monarch and these other types of things as well. So that's where he says, what need is there to speak of mere local kingship? It's like, well, I've already done all these other really, outstanding things. What is it to, give up this local kingship? It's not really such a big deal necessarily. And he says, okay, well, what is it? What are the deeds that I've done in my past that led to this accomplishment of being able to get to enlightenment by myself without the help of any teachers or any guides as a actually fully enlightened Buddha? Well, he says, okay, there's this ripening of 3 types of deeds, 3 things. These are the 3 primary things that led him to being able to get to enlightenment by himself as a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha. It's the generosity, the mastery of the mind, and refraining. And where a discourse like this helps you is that if this is what led to him getting to enlightenment as a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha, of course, you're not going to be a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha, but you'll be enlightened, which will be plenty nice for you. You'll be very pleased with that. You're going to need to do the same things that he did. You're going to need to practice generosity. You're going to need to master your mind, and you're going to need to restrain your mind, refrain it, pull it back, right? So these are 3 important things to pay attention to as you develop your practice. If you're not currently practicing generosity with the people around you, you're going to need to do that, whether it's your family, your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, people you don't even know, you've never met before. Remember, you're practicing from the middle way where you're sharing your time, effort, energy, and resources. Sometimes we talk about generosity and giving, people immediately think money. But, you can think about it in other ways too, that you can give people a ride to go somewhere. You can hold the door for somebody. You can, do small little things. Frequency is more important. That, several times during your day, you can find ways to practice generosity. You're going to need to master your mind. You're going to need to have a very disciplined mind, and you're going to need to restrain the mind and pull it back. So pay attention to these 3 things, because when the Buddha is talking about what led to his enlightenment, those are the same things you're going to need to practice too. And you'll see this in other parts of his teachings of what led to him experiencing the things that he's experiencing. In fact, you're going to see a discourse here in a moment where he talks about all the different qualities of what led him to what he was experiencing in that life. These are the things that you need to pay attention to, because you're going to need to practice the exact same things. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. Okay, don't see any questions. So now we'll go to the next one. This is chapter 28, and it looks like Pat would like to read that one. Go ahead, sir.
I think these next 2 are pretty long, so it'll be a bit. Why human beings are seen to be unwholesome and wholesome. Then the Brahmin student Subha, Todeya's son, went to the perfectly enlightened one and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and friendly talk was finished, he sat down at one side and asked the perfectly enlightened one, Master Gotama, what is the cause and condition why human beings are seen to be unwholesome and wholesome? For people are seen to be short-lived and long-lived, sickly and healthy, ugly and beautiful, uninfluential and influential, poor and wealthy, low-born and high-born, unwise and wise. What is the cause and condition, Master Gotama, why human beings are seen to be wholesome and unwholesome? Student, beings are owners of their own actions, heirs of their actions. They originate from their actions, are bound to their actions, have their actions as their refuge. It is action that distinguishes beings as wholesome and unwholesome. I do not understand in detail the meaning of Master Gotama's statement, which he spoke in brief without expounding the meaning in detail. It would be good if Master Gotama would teach me the teaching so that I might understand in detail the meaning of Master Gotama's statement. Then, student, listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, sir, the Brahmin student Subha replied. The perfectly enlightened one said this, Dear student, some man or woman kills living beings and is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But if on the dissolution of the body after death, he does not reappear in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, in hell, but instead comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is short-lived. This is the way, student, that leads to short life. Namely, one kills living being and is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. Excuse me. But here, students, some man or woman, abandoning the killing of living beings, abstains from killing living beings. With rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly, he resides compassionate to all living beings. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. But if on the dissolution of the body after death, he does not reappear in a happy destination in the heavenly world, but instead comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is long-lived. This is the way, student, that leads to long life, namely, abandoning the killing of living beings. One abstains from killing living beings. With rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly, one resides compassionate to all living beings. Here, student, some man or woman is given to injuring beings with the hand, with a clod, with a stick, or with a knife. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is sickly. This is the way, student, that leads to sickliness. Namely, one is given to injuring beings with a hand, with a clod, with a stick, or with a knife. But here, student, some man or woman is not given to injuring beings with the hand, with a clod, with a stick, or with a knife. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is healthy. This is the way, student, that leads to health. Namely, one is given to injuring beings with a hand, with a clod, with a stick, or with a knife. Here, students, some man or woman is of an angry and irritable character. Even when criticized a little, he is offended, becomes angry, hostile, and resentful, and displays anger, hate, and bitterness. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is ugly. This is the way, student, that leads to ugliness. Namely, one is of an angry and irritable character, even when criticized a little. He is offended, becomes angry, hostile, and resentful, and displays anger, hate, and bitterness. But here, student, some man or woman is not of an angry and irritable character. Even when criticized a little, he is not offended. He does not become angry, hostile, and resentful, and does not display anger, hate, and bitterness. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is beautiful. This is the way, student, that leads to being beautiful. Namely, one is not of an angry and irritable character, even when criticized a little. He is not offended, does not become angry, hostile, and resentful, and does not display anger, hate, and bitterness. Here, student, some man or woman is jealous, one who is selfish, resentful, and feels bitter about the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration received by others. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is uninfluential. This is the way, student, that leads to being uninfluential. Namely, one is jealous, resentful, and feels bitter towards the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration received by others. But here, student, some man or woman is not jealous, one who is not selfish, resentful, and feels bitter about the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration received by others. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is influential. This is the way, student, that leads to being influential. Namely, one is not jealous, resentful, and feels bitter towards the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration received by others. Here, student, some man or woman does not give food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics or Brahmins. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is poor. This is the way, student, that leads to poverty. Namely, one does not give food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwellings, and lamps to ascetics or Brahmins. But here, students, some man or woman gives food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics and Brahmins. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is wealthy. This is the way, student, that leads to wealth. Namely, one gives food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics and Brahmins. Here, student, some man or woman is stubborn and arrogant. He does not pay homage, respect, to one who should receive homage, respect, does not rise up for one in whose presence he should rise up, does not offer a seat to one who deserves a seat, does not make way for one for whom he should make way, and does not honor, respect, appreciate, and venerate one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is low-born. This is the way, student, that leads to low birth. Namely, one is stubborn and arrogant. He does not pay homage or respect to one who should receive homage, respect, does not rise up for one in whose presence he should rise up, does not offer a seat to one who deserves a seat, does not make way for one whom he should make way, and does not honor, respect, appreciate, and venerate one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. But here, student, some man or woman is not stubborn and arrogant. He pays homage to one who should receive homage, rises up for one in whose presence he should rise up, offers a seat to one whom he deserves a seat, makes way for one for whom he should make way, and honors, respects, appreciates, and venerates one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is highborn. This is the way, student, that leads to high birth. Namely, one is not stubborn and arrogant. He pays homage, respect to one who should receive homage, respect, rises up for one in whose presence he should rise up, offers a seat to one who deserves a seat, makes way for one makes way for one for whom he should make way, and honors, respects, appreciates, and venerates one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. Here, students, some man or woman does not visit an ascetic or a Brahmin and ask, Venerable Sir, what is wholesome? What is unwholesome? What is blamable? What is blameless? What should be cultivated? What should not be cultivated? What kind of action will lead to my harm and discontentedness for a long time? What kind of action will lead to my welfare and peacefulness for a long time? Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is unwise. This is the way, student, that leads to being unwise. Namely, one does not visit an ascetic and Brahmin and ask such questions. But here, student, some man or woman visits an ascetic or a Brahmin and asks, Venerable Sir, what is wholesome? What is unwholesome? What is blamable? What is blameless? What should be cultivated? What should not be cultivated? What kind of action will lead to my harm and discontentedness for a long time? What kind of action will lead to my welfare and peacefulness for a long time? Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in a heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is wise. This is the way, student, that leads to wisdom. Namely, one visits an ascetic or Brahmin and asks such questions. Thus, student, the way that leads to short life makes people short-lived. The way that leads to long life makes people long-lived. The way that leads to sickliness makes people sickly. The way that leads to health makes people healthy. The way that leads to ugliness makes people ugly. The way that leads to being beautiful makes people beautiful. The way that leads to being uninfluential makes people uninfluential. The way that leads to being influential makes people influential. The way that leads to poverty makes people poor. The way that leads to wealth makes people wealthy. The way that leads to low birth makes people low-born. The way that leads to high birth makes people high-born. The way that leads to unwise makes people unwise. The way that leads to wisdom makes people wise. Beings are owners of their actions. Student, heirs of their actions. They originate from their actions, are bound to their actions, have their actions as their refuge. It is action that distinguishes beings as wholesome and unwholesome. When this was said, the Brahmin student Suba, Todaya's son, said to the perfectly enlightened one, Magnificent, Master Gotama, magnificent. Master Gotama has made the teachings clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overturned, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who is lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those who with eyesight to see forms. I go to Master Gotama for refuge and to the teachings and to the community of monks. Let Master Gotama remember me as a household practitioner who has gone to him for refuge for life. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So there's a couple of things that you guys can do with a discourse like this. And, whenever I see a discourse like this, and, Pat did an excellent job reading that, but you can see that it's quite challenging to actually even read this. Think about the Buddha, right? A perfectly enlightened one who was able to speak this, right, in the way that it's spoken. And then think about his students who remembered this and then they recited it, right? And they recounted it and they documented it. There's a lot of work here that's gone into us being able to get access to these teachings. And that's where an enormous amount of appreciation, gratitude, and respect comes in for the people from the past who have handed down these teachings from person to person to person to person. That's one thing that you can glean from a discourse like this. The next thing is that you're never interested in believing this kind of stuff, right? Because the Buddha is teaching you the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, of what are the actions that an individual can do that's going to lead to certain results. And what you can do is you can go through these and you can actually independently verify these. Let me just kind of take one of these. There's one down here where the Buddha is talking about a man or woman who is angry and of irritable character, that they have hostility and resentment and this bitterness in their mind, right? And he says, okay, wherever this person is reborn, they're ugly, right? Well, that's what we understand for rebirth, but you can actually see that right now too. Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror when you're angry or you're feeling frustrated or irritable? You don't look beautiful, right? You look very ugly, right? This is the cause and effect. This is the natural law of Kamma. And then conversely, if you don't have that bitterness and hostility in your mind, this is where the beauty and the attractiveness is, right? So you can see this right now in this life. The Buddha here is talking about future rebirth, but we can verify it right now in a life right now. So this is what you would like to do, is go through and verify all of these things. So you can see like, oh my gosh, this is so true. You can see people who are jealous, right? When they're jealous in this particular life, they're not very influential because they're constantly jealous. So you can see it in this life. So that's the second thing that you can do with a discourse like this. And then the third thing that you would like to do is you would like to go through a discourse like this and look at all the unwholesome qualities that the Buddha said would be unwise to practice and eliminate those from your day-to-day life in the way that your mind practices, in the way that you function on a daily basis. And then look at all the wholesome qualities that he's talking about that would be wise to practice. And now you actually practice those, because that's what's going to get you closer and closer to enlightenment. So even though he's talking about rebirth here, you can actually use it now in order to be able to get to enlightenment now. And ultimately, what he comes to help you understand is that beings are wholesome and unwholesome based on their actions. And he's listing out all these unwholesome things, and he's listing out all these wholesome things. He's listing out the things that you would like to eliminate as part of your practice that are unwholesome. And he's talking about all the things that you need to cultivate, because these same things that lead to rebirth and a improved existence, it also leads to enlightenment in this existence too. So that's how you can use a discourse like this to improve your practice. So I'm not going to have time to go through each one of these individually, but if you guys have questions on any of them that you're curious about, let me know and I will help you. So you can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like we have some questions coming in on YouTube. A question here. Good evening, Guru. I think you said David. Can you please give me one powerful technique to purify? I got to move some things out of the way to see all that. To purify the self and impressions of mind. Can you please give me one powerful technique to purify the self and impressions of the mind? Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is that there is no self. You're not purifying the self here. On the path to enlightenment, what you're doing is you're purifying the mind. That's what you would like to be able to do. The thing that you need to do in order to accomplish that is to study the Eightfold Path. There isn't just one technique to be able to purify the mind. You need to be able to learn all the different attributes of what it takes to have a fully developed practice to be able to purify the mind. So it's the Eightfold Path that's going to help you to be able to do that. I can see that you haven't understood the three universal truths yet, which is the very first teaching of the Buddha, where he talks about that there is no self. So you need to start there with the very beginning teaching. So there isn't just one teaching that is so powerful that's going to instantly purify your mind. Instead, there's multiple techniques. So I encourage you to study the Eightfold Path, commit it to your memory, and practice it closely, tweaking it day by day and getting your practice up closer and closer to the Eightfold Path. Additional question from the same person. So is it a 8 ways combined path, sir? There's 8 individual factors, and then behind each one of those factors, there's sub-factors as well. So if you use any of the resources that I share, because you'll find plenty of places that are sharing what they refer to as the Eightfold Path, but it's not based in the original words of the Buddha. You're on our YouTube channel, so do a search for the Eightfold Path. I teach this pretty much at least once, if not more, every single month. And I've been doing that for multiple years. So there's going to be a whole litany of resources on our YouTube channel about the Eightfold Path. And now if you study that, you're going to need to study it multiple times. It's not going to be just learning it once and then you master it. That particular teaching takes me about 2.5 hours to teach it, but you're going to need to learn that probably 6, 8 times. And then you're going to need to study it. There's a study guide on our website buddhadailywisdom.com, and you'll find the study guide there, because you're going to need to watch the videos multiple times. You're going to need to read the books. You're going to need to use the study guide. You're going to need to ask questions. This is how you're going to hone that in very, very closely. Additional here, sir, any PDF or book available on this? Yes. If you go to our website, buddhadailywisdom.com, click on free books, and then from there, the very first book, the Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, chapters 4 and 5 are the Eightfold Path. That's what you would like to be studying, but you really need to study the entire book. There's no shortcuts here. Sometimes people are very discontent with the fact that their mind is discontent, and they're trying to hurry up and race to enlightenment. Just give me that one technique, just point me to the place. I would encourage you to slow down and just gradually take your time. And we're starting the group learning program from the very beginning on the 9th of August. This is a great program for you. You can start reading that book, and I go chapter by chapter every week over a 7-month period. So while chapter 4 and 5 is the Eightfold Path, you're going to need to learn throughout all the programs to really build up your practice. So I would encourage you to start with the group learning program that's on Sunday and Wednesdays. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. Okay, so now we go to our next chapter. This next chapter here is the marks of a great man, 32 marks of a Buddha. I usually don't have you guys read this one in class because it's quite long, but also what you need to really do in order to get the benefits of this is you really need to pick it apart. Because what the Buddha is doing here is he's recounting all the things that he did in previous lives that led to the qualities that he had in this particular life that he lived. Why does he look the way does he look? Why is it that he has a certain physical appearance? So what you do with a discourse like this is you look at the wholesome qualities that he's talking about. And now you cultivate these wholesome qualities. And that's how you actually use a discourse like this. So this is another quite long one. The last one I think is important to read because you guys can learn from that. But this one, you're going to need to pick it apart, right? So the Buddha is talking about here how the Tathagata lived without anger, right? And what that led to in terms of the way that he looks today and what he experiences today, right? It helps him to get to this bright complexion, the color of gold, right? So he's explaining each individual thing of why he's looking the way that he is and what it actually led to based on what he did in his previous life. So you'd like to pick this kind of discourse apart and again, see the wholesome qualities that he's practicing and the unwholesome qualities that he's eliminating, because that's how a discourse like this will help you. So let me know if you guys have questions on this particular discourse, this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. This is the marks of a great man, 32 marks of a Buddha, that particular Buddha that lived during that time frame. Okay, you're welcome. Pleased to help you. Okay, I don't see any questions here. You guys either are planning to read this or maybe you've already read it. And now we go to this last one for today, which is chapter 30. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, it looks like Yiheng again. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. The simile of a lump of salt. Monks, if one were to say thus, a person experiences Kamma in precisely the same way that he created it. In such a case, there could be no living of the spiritual life, and no opportunity would be for completely making an end of discontentedness. But if one were to say thus, when a person creates Kamma that is to be experienced in a particular way, he experiences its result precisely in that way. In such a case, the living of the spiritual life is possible, and an opportunity is seen for completely making an end of discontentedness. Here, monks, some person has created a small amount of unwholesome Kamma, yet it leads him to hell, while some other person here has created exactly the same small amount of Kamma, yet it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight residue being seen, much less plentiful. what kind of person creates a small amount of unwholesome karma that leads him to hell? Here, some person is undeveloped in body, virtuous behavior, mind, and wisdom. He is limited and has a mean character, and he dwells in discontentedness. When such a person creates a small amount of unwholesome karma, it leads him to hell. What kind of person creates exactly the same small amount of unwholesome karma, and yet it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight being seen, much less plentiful? Here, some person is developed in body, virtuous behavior, mind, and wisdom. He is unlimited and has a lofty character, and he resides without measure. When such a person creates exactly the same small amount of unwholesome karma, it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight being seen, much less plentiful. Suppose a man would drop a lump of salt into a small bowl of water. What do you think, monks? What would that lump of salt make the small quantity of water in the bowl salty and undrinkable? Yes, venerable sir. For what reason? Because the water in the bowl is limited. Thus, that lump of salt would make it salty and undrinkable. But suppose a man would drop a lump of salt into the river Ganges. What do you think, monks? Would that lump of salt make the river Ganges become salty and undrinkable? No, venerable sir. For what reason? Because the river Ganges contains a large volume of water. Thus, that lump of salt would not make it salty and undrinkable. So too, monks, some person here has created a small amount of unwholesome karma, yet it leads him to hell, while some other person here has created exactly the same small amount of karma, yet it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight being seen, much less abundant. Here, monks, someone is imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana, coin currency, a kahapana or 100 kahapanas, while someone else is not imprisoned for stealing the same amount of money. What kind of person is imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana, or 100 kahapanas? Here someone is poor, with little property and wealth. Such a person is imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana, or 100 kahapanas. What kind of person is not imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana, or 100 kahapanas? Here someone is rich, with much money and wealth. Such a person is not imprisoned for stealing half a kahapana, or 100 kahapanas. So too, monks, some person has created a small amount of unwholesome karma, yet it leads him to hell, while some other person here has created exactly the same small amount of karma, yet it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight being seen, much less abundant. Monks, take the case of a sheep merchant or butcher, who can execute, imprison, fine, or otherwise penalize someone who has stolen one of his sheep, but can't do so to someone else who has stolen his sheep. What kind of person can the sheep merchant or butcher execute, imprison, fine, or otherwise penalize for stealing a sheep? One who is poor, with little property and wealth. The sheep merchant or butcher can execute, imprison, fine, or otherwise penalize such a person for stealing a sheep. What kind of person can the sheep merchant or butcher execute, imprison, fine, or otherwise penalize for stealing a sheep? One who is rich with a lot of money and wealth, a king or royal minister. The sheep merchant or butcher can execute, imprison, fine, or otherwise penalize such a person for stealing a sheep. he can only plead with him, "Sir, return my sheep or pay me for it." So too, monks, some person has created a small amount of unwholesome karma, yet it leads him to hell, while some other person here has created exactly the same small amount of karma, yet it is to be experienced in this very life, without even a slight being seen, much less abundant. If monks, one were to say thus, a person experiences karma in precisely the same way that he created it. In such a case, there could be no living of the spiritual life, and no opportunity would be seen for completely making an end of discontentedness. But if one were to say thus, when a person creates karma that is to be experienced in a particular way, he experiences its result precisely in that way. In such a case, the living of the spiritual life is possible, and an opportunity is seen for completely making an end of discontentedness. Thank you, Teacher David.
All right. Thank you, Yihang. So what the Buddha is talking about here is the same action, the same decision can produce Kamma differently depending on the individual and depending on the person. He gives a great analogy here of this lump of salt, where he says, if you have this lump of salt, it's the same lump of salt, it's dropped into a bowl of water, is the water drinkable? And of course, the answer is no. But that same lump of salt dropped into the river, is the water still drinkable? Yes, of course. So the water represents the wholesome Kamma of your previous decisions. If you don't have very many wholesome decisions that you've made in the past, that same lump of salt, that same unwise action is going to affect these two people differently. Oftentimes people want to look at the natural law of Kamma and they think that, it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And if this person does that, they're going to get this. And if this person does that, they're going to get this. This is the permanence that the mind is craving and expecting. That's the way the natural law functions, but it doesn't function that way. There's multiple variables involved in any given situation. So that's why you're not going to be able to see somebody else's Kamma with 100% clarity, but you'll be able to see your own. But understand that one particular action can affect different people differently. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. And he's saying if you can see that, then an end of discontentedness is possible, right? So here at the beginning and at the end, when he's talking about this, he says, monks, if it were to say a person experiences Kamma in precisely the same way that he created it, in such a case, there could be no living of the spiritual life, and no opportunity would be seen for completely making an end of discontentedness. And the reason why is because you can't understand the natural law of Kamma in that way, that this is exactly what this person did, person A, person B, person C, and they're all going to experience exactly the same thing. If that's the way someone thinks, they're not understanding the natural law of Kamma. They're not going to awaken to understanding this natural law, that there's multiple variables involved. So therefore, they're not going to be able to fully cultivate wisdom of this natural law. They're not going to be able to become fully awake, and they're not going to be able to get to the end of discontentedness where the mind is experiencing complete peace and joy. But if one were to say thus, when a person creates Kamma, that is to be experienced in a particular way, right? Based on the variables that are happening, he experiences its results precisely in that way, based on certain variables that are involved. In such a case, the living of the spiritual life is possible, and an opportunity is seen for completely making an end of discontentedness, because you're understanding that there's multiple variables involved, that not everybody's going to experience Kamma in the same exact way. It depends on multiple variables. So you need to be able to understand that. So that's why, if you remember back to one of the discourses where the Buddha talks about things that are essentially inconceivable, that you can't literally conceive the exact result of Kamma, right? So if we say, if I cheat on my husband or my wife, what's going to happen to me? We can't say, well, this is exactly what's going to happen to you. We can't say that because we can't say it in that way. But what we can say is we can say, well, you're very likely to get in arguments, to get fights. You're potentially going to lose money, lose wealth. You're going to maybe get sexually transmitted diseases. You're maybe going to break up your marriage or your relationship. There's any number of things that we could say these are possibilities, but we wouldn't be able to say that it's precisely going to be experienced in this exact way. Instead, there's these particular options of ways of things that you could potentially experience. And that's the variables involved here. And if you can start to see that with the natural law of Kamma, then you can make an end of discontentedness, because you're starting to see that it's not a black and white, one for one type of thing, that there's a lot of variables here. And now by being able to see that, you'll be able to understand this natural law more and more, and ultimately make an end of discontentedness. So the Buddha is going through and helping you to be able to see that in this discourse. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this. This is a discourse that you'll see multiple times throughout our book series, the simile of a lump of salt. You can put those questions into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, it looks like we have a bunch of questions coming in here on YouTube. Let me check these first, Yihang. So the question is, what is the natural law it's depicting? Can you kindly come again, sir? And how do we apply in life? What I suggest you do, because it sounds like you haven't studied with the foundational text, is you go back to volume 1 and you study that, because what the questions that you're asking here are things that you haven't studied in the foundational program. And it's best for you to do that, because in that first book, volume 1, chapter 9 is dedicated to the natural law of Kamma. And you'll be able to understand it there, because it's very simple and very basic. It's just cause and effect, or action and result, but you need to be able to see it more fully. So I would suggest you start with the foundational text that I've already guided you to on our website. That's the best way to help you. Okay, Yihang, go ahead, ma'am.
I remember before sometimes I saw some people's achievements, and then this mind was also inspired to have that achievements happens. And then I will go to find that person's interview or books and just figure out what they did and what they have like a saying to say, like how they achieve those successful things. And then when I practice some of them, it doesn't really lead to that achievements. Was that the Buddha says like there's too many variables is involved, so it's not that exact Kamma that you can really kind of like copy from other.
Exactly, Yihang. You're seeing that very clear. That's exactly what he's talking about.
Okay, but when if I would still want to achieve that thing, was that in the way that I have to take in consideration to look into that action in my view of my past, like what that action is gonna happen for me. So not like just listen to that person's interview, what they say, but I have to see if I do this action in my life and take into my variables and see how that would be figuring out.
Yeah, you'll see that you're going to, well, what I would suggest for you is I wouldn't copy what other people are doing, because depending on what they're doing, it might not be based in the wholesome qualities. If you learn what the Buddha is teaching, no matter what it is that you're interested in accomplishing, you'd be able to accomplish those things. So whether it's about business or whether it's about any other thing, you might learn like business skills from other people, like marketing or entrepreneurship or things like that. But when it comes down to implementing any particular aspect of entrepreneurship or marketing, you would like to compare and contrast what you're seeing from people to the natural laws, because oftentimes people nowadays are teaching things that aren't matching with the natural laws, and it's going to produce unwholesome results. And they're not accurately describing what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. They'll paint this big, beautiful picture of how wonderful their life is and how everything's going for them. But in the background, you don't see that their life is actually really struggling. They're having all kinds of difficulties. They might just be really painting that picture in order to sell a bunch of books or sell you a course on how to do some particular thing. But in the background, their life is really struggling. So whenever you're learning things, you're never interested in believing anybody about anything. including entrepreneurship or marketing or any of these things, always compare it and contrast it to what you're learning on the path to enlightenment. There's a student who I'm been helping quite a bit over the last a year or two, and they're changing their career, and they've been getting a lot of training on the job training from a particular company. And they're sharing that with me, and I'm helping them to be able to see how this is completely opposite of the natural laws. And they were like 1 or 2 or 3 months into their career. And at first they thought this company was going really, really well and everything was going great. But then once they got into this company further and deeper, they started seeing all these problems. And now they've actually left that company, and that company actually didn't even pay them their paycheck. And so they were learning all these kind of like unwise ways to conduct business. And just because they were taking the company on face value, they were implementing those things, and it wasn't producing the results that they're looking for. And then ultimately they ended up having to leave that company. And when they did, they didn't even get all their money. Like they owed them $5,000 and they only gave them $1,000 out of that money. So this company projects this image that they are very astute business practitioners, and they're teaching all these people how to do these things, but in the background, they're doing all these unwise things. So you got to be able to think for yourself when you're learning these things, and you see somebody, that's promoting that, if you do these things, it's going to get you these things. You've got to be able to see it through the natural law of Kamma and know for yourself. And then also, like you're asking about, is what you're going to experience is going to be different than other people, because the natural law of Kamma doesn't affect all of us in exactly the same way.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So I'll just end class by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for your interest to learn and understand the teachings of the Buddha. Next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters. So if you'd like to study chapters 31 through 40, you're welcome to do that. We'll be exploring those in our next week's class. Tomorrow in the group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 24, which is titled Misunderstandings of Gotama Buddha's Teachings. This is where I go through 9 different things that are very common misunderstandings in the world. Because if you actually learn the misunderstandings of the teachings of the Buddha and you practice those, it's going to hinder you from getting to enlightenment. But if you understand what those common misunderstandings are, then you won't practice those, and it'll actually help you to be able to get to enlightenment. So I'm going to talk about the history of where these misunderstandings come from, and then I'm going to talk about these 9 misunderstandings so that you can understand those. So if you'd like to attend, you're more than welcome to at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. tomorrow. So thank you all for joining, and perhaps I'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.